Well, hello there, and you join us here today to answer the difficult question that's been plaguing our minds since, well, maybe about 6 months ago. Is Tudor now a better watchmaker than Rolex? Whether you like Tudor or Rolex, you'll find both at watchfinder.com, link in the description below. Tom, I'm someone who likes to buy watches, and some of those watches I can afford, the others I can't, so it's either stealing or not owning them at all. And it's made me wonder, are some of those watches I can't afford as cracked up as they are supposed to be? Have some of those... Does that make sense?
That's good talk wording, that is.
And I was thinking, are these watches that we can't afford any better than the ones we can?
Right.
Has Tudor finally become a better value purchase than Rolex? Initial thoughts before we dive into it.
My initial thoughts probably skip to the end and say, a Tudor is not a Rolex, is it? and on the flip side, people only associate Tudor as being the Rolex that you can't afford. So there's just kind of a negative back and forth there, both against Tudor. That would be my initial thoughts. But we'll go through it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we're here, aren't we? So, we've got 12 minutes, so let's do it. Tom, let's start off with a quick overview of Rolex. It was founded in 1905 by Mr. Hans Wilsdorf.
On the bus.
It ushered in the current generation of wristwatches where people were wearing pocket watches before. The big idea was Hans couldn't compete with the great pocket watch manufacturers like Omega and Patek Philippe, so he changed the playing field, made wristwatches, and fought them there on his own turf. In a good old game of Bopsy Doody or whatever they used to play. The great thing about it was Rolex never really invented anything themselves. They would pick and choose from different patents that they either purchased or just borrowed, put them all together and package them up in the best way possible. Very much like a contemporary Apple does these days with its own technology.
He was having some jam one day and he screwed the lid back on the jam jar and he was like, hold on, is that watertight? And it was. So he went to the watchmaker's shop.
Yeah, I think you missed a bit from that story. He was eating jam on a boat and the jam jar fell over the side and he said, oh no, but his jam was fine.
He was like, genie, rescue my jam. And the genie just went, Rolex.
True story.
Yeah.
So you can't really talk about watches without talking about Rolex. They've been in so many different places, nibbled at so many different lunches as we've gone on.
Like a rat.
That it's intrinsically part of the industry, like a rat.
Yeah, you're never more than 6 feet away from a Rolex in New York.
Let's talk about some of the pros, Tom, and you listed some already. One, it's the most famous watch brand in the world. You won't find famouser, Tom. Two,
yeah,
if you can buy one of their watches for RRP, chances are they're giving you free money for free along with that purchase. And who doesn't like free money? You've got all that history we spoke about, the lineage, the impact it's had on the industry. And then, of course, as an actual usable watch, it's always been about the functionality. They're very rugged, they're very precise. The accuracy of those movements is incredible, some of the best in the industry. You package it all up and you've got something really rather special and very, very desirable. All sounds pretty good so far, doesn't it?
Yeah, cool. That sounds really good. How much?
Well, all of it really, because there are some cons to Rolex as well. If they weren't hard to get, they'd still be pretty expensive. You're looking at a chronograph in the £13,000 range, a dive watch in the £8,000-9,000 range. These aren't cheap. There are a lot cheaper watches with the same or even better specs. Looking at Omega and even, of course, which we're going to be talking about in a second, Tudor. And last of all, although they are well built, they're not necessarily the best quality. They're not Patek Philippe's or Langenzones. They don't give you the huge finishing quality and other desirable aspects of a mechanical watch that you can get elsewhere. So painting a little bit more of a sour picture around the whole Rolex thing, do you still feel as confident now as you were at the beginning of this, whatever this is?
Yeah, I mean, hard to get, expensive. I'll give you those ones. I agree. But yeah, the history, not so much bothered. Yeah, fairly young in relation to some of the other notable brands. And the quality thing, I'm not sure about. Sure, they don't go in for, engraved balance cocks and, guilloche and all that sort of thing. But I do think they're very shiny, Andrew. You have to agree with that, surely. I mean, I don't know how that relates to quality, but I think the quality is very, very shiny.
Who knew that was a rating of quality? Let's move on to Tudor, look at the pros and cons of that brand and see whether or not it makes any difference to your perspective. So Tudor was originally created in 1920, as in the name, but the brand itself didn't emerge until 1948. Same founder, Hans Wilsdorf, and he was thinking, I'd be making my Rolex watches more and more expensive, and there's a gap in the market. This probably sounds familiar. And so he brought out Tudor as this affordable version of Rolex. Now, Tudor, because it was cheaper, was used by a lot more different militaries around the world, navies and such, because they could afford one over the Rolex. So has probably seen a lot more actual action as a dive watch than the Submariner. Also had that very, very lovely snowflake hand, which has become a highlight of the Tudor collection today. And it was revived in 2010 under the Heritage collection, again to backfill the gap that was emerging beneath the Rolex price point. Believe it or not, you could buy Submariners about 10 years ago for £2,500. You definitely can't do that now. That's where the Tudor Black Bay and all of its other heritage watches comes in. Those are the watches that I'm starting to think may offer a better value proposition than Rolex. Well, let's go through some of the pros and cons of a Tudor purchase and bring this all to a summarial close, because there are a lot of pros to buying a Tudor. For one, it's much more affordable. A Black Bay is less than half the price of a Submariner. The quality is almost on par with Rolex. You sit one side by side and you feel like you're not looking at the cheap version or the expensive version. You feel like you're looking at the chunky modern version and the throwback version. But both still have that lovely quality shine, Tom, the thing you desire so much. It does have its own history as well. As I mentioned, Tudor and its Submariner were used by a lot of armed forces purely because it was cheaper, not because they couldn't get on the wait list for a Submariner at their local store. They chose it because it fit their needs better. And that's kind of the ethos, really. It fits the needs of more people better. And I also wonder, for those people who aren't drawn immediately to the idea of Rolex being the marker of success and have moved on for that, perhaps they've tried it, that Tudor is a little bit less try-hard. It's a bit more like, oh yeah, I know it's a Tudor, I don't care. I know I like it, this is for me rather than for everyone else.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. And that is the thing, isn't it? It is like, I think Rolex is very much now a statement piece. Tudor's still going for that robustness, still leaning on those original designs, still, very much understated. I don't really have any kind of fascination with vintage or, that kind of anachronistic instrument aesthetic. Doesn't really impress me at all. But ceramic with a crown logo, now we're talking.
I suppose for some people, the elegance and the shininess and all of those sort of more jewellery and decorative elements might become of higher value to them in a product, whereas some might think, oh, I want something that's really very functional and gives me that sense of being in the golden age of exploration rather than in the modern age of showing off on Instagram. Should we talk about some of the cons of Tudor then and summarise? I think the big one is it's always in the shadow of Rolex. And for some, they perceive that as a good thing. It's like the skunk works of this big brand. It's the other stuff. It's the if you know kind of side of it. But then for many people, it's that's the cheap one. Oh, you should have got a Rolex if you wanted a Rolex. The explanation of, it is made by Rolex, all of that. And because of that, perhaps for some people, if it's in the shadow of Rolex, it won't be as fulfilling to own. If you're purchasing something as a mark of your success and achievement, to put a line under a moment where you went, yes, I did it, the Tudor might feel a bit like, I almost got there. And perhaps as well, some of the models aren't as refined as the Rolex ones because they're pared back and they have more of that simple aesthetic. They lose some of the finesse and detailing of the modern Rolexes.
yeah, it is what it is. I suppose, they're going two different directions. I think maybe now we might see Rolex lean even harder into that a luxurious feel, and Tudor will keep going on with their pared back tool watch vibe.
I think my take on it is it really depends on what your draw is to a watch in the first place. If you want something that feels like the underdog, that has some history and heritage, that feels more of a vintage throwback, potentially is even used today in a military setting by the armed forces, the Tudor does offer more value for money and an experience that's very, very similar. If you're looking for something to commemorate an achievement and you want to do the rote thing when you do that and buy a Rolex, everyone has a Rolex when they make it, then the Tudor's just not going to do it for you, I don't think. You have to weigh up what those benefits are for you and which one of those provides more for your own specific needs.
But always remember, G-Shock's got carbon core guard.
Well, there you have it. Tudor or Rolex, which would be your preference and why? Do you think Tudor is starting to nip at the heels of Rolex, or does it have no chance at all? Let me know down in the comments below. And remember, if you're looking to buy either one of those for yourself, you'll find them at watchfinder.com. Link in the description below. Thank you and goodbye.